You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. We have a special guest today, former NBA basketball player Chris Herren. He will be sharing his story of how he went from a rising star in his community to the risks he took in active addiction and how he recovered. And just a quick note before we jump in, there are so many people I would love to invite onto the podcast that I know you will love. The first thing they do is they go to iTunes to see what the ratings are. They also go to social media to see what the followings are like. So if you enjoy the podcast, could I ask you to please leave a 5-star review and a rating on Apple Podcasts? It's a zero-cost way to support the podcast, and on a personal note, it would mean the world to me. As a community, we can spread the message that recovery is possible and bring hope to people suffering all over the world. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Chris. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's such an honor. You have such an amazing story. I was just telling you that I heard you on the Rich Roll podcast and I was like, hot damn, I got to get this guy on. You have so many good stories.
Yeah.
But I kind of thought we would start at the beginning a little bit. Maybe, where would be fun to start? I heard you telling a story about how you had just done a Sports Illustrated photo shoot. I think you were about 18, and you walked into a dorm room with a bunch of stuff there. Why don't we start there? What was that first experience like?
I think it's important to talk about those experiences because I do think when it comes to substance use, I think we are so heavy on the worst day and the outcome at the end rather than understanding the why in the beginning. And I was an 18-year-old kid and I grew up in a house that suffered from alcoholism. My parents at that time were actively going through a divorce, probably 10 years too late. And So I didn't walk on that campus, although I was extremely talented and focused around basketball. I wasn't well, emotionally, and I really didn't have an anchor to myself socially. So sadly, that night was pivotal. I walked in that room and there was cocaine on the table, and I grew up a Celtics fan, and the legend of Lenny Bias, one of the best basketball players to ever live, that he did cocaine one time and he lost his life. And that story was very real to me. And I still did it. And I still took that chance. And again, that moment, that night at 18 years old, opened doors for me that, I'm still shutting. Although I'm 15 years sober, that night is still a big part of my life.
It's so crazy to think that you had so much going for you at the time, and you had a lot of pressure, a lot of people counting on you, a lot of expectations for you to perform, and facing that choice of this might kill me, and then choosing to do it anyway.
Sad, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in this era of fentanyl, it's that much more powerful for kids who are making that decision to go one time. But again, in hindsight, I look at that moment in my life, and there was an enormous amount of pressure on me at 18. But the truth is, there was a ton of pain, right? There was a ton of pain in my life that was unresolved, and a lot of moments that I needed to heal from. And my parents did the best they could, and with my dad struggling, obviously my mom, she struggled with him, He was the alcoholic and she was the wife and the mother. And there wasn't a lot of time for healing in the house. There wasn't a lot of moments to reflect and say, let's move past this. So I brought a lot of that with me at 18 years old to a college campus. And I tell people all the time, I mean, and people who've never done cocaine, really, it's hard to understand it. But cocaine, I had such a relationship with it because cocaine allowed me to communicate openly and like really pour my heart and soul out. And it would be 4 o'clock in the morning and I'd be sitting in a dorm room and I'm talking about my childhood and I'm talking about all the pressures I'm facing. And it literally brought a sense of peace over me, and that's what I fell in love with cocaine. That was the relationship I had with cocaine, because it wasn't looking forward to partying, to going to nightclubs. I truly looked forward to just talking and talking openly and honestly.
Yeah, you were saying for those listening who haven't done it, I think the majority of the people listening to my podcast probably do. And I remember I was probably a little younger than that the first time I tried it. And
Mm.
it was like suddenly, and I was hanging out with a cheerleader from high school, and I was like a freshman, and she was like a senior, and I thought we were going to be best friends forever.
Totally. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because it
Yeah.
was like it was the sharing. It was
Yeah.
the open-hearted sharing, and I had never felt connected to anybody like I had when I was in that moment.
Totally. Yeah, yeah.
What a relief to be able to share.
Mm,
And that's, when I hear you talk about that, I was like, oh, it was the sharing. And I would imagine
mm,
it sounds like you grew up in a rough neighborhood. And I
mhm.
would imagine that men and boys are not really encouraged to share their feelings. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess
No,
that's kind of
there
obvious.
was there wasn't much of that, right? I
Yeah,
grew up in
yeah.
a very competitive house. I grew up in and again, my parents did the best they could,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
my parents were really young when they had my brother and I, and they didn't have the skill set.
No.
They didn't have the skill set to kind of walk me through the process and obviously let's sit down at the dinner table and share how we feel.
Feelings.
I never had those moments. um but
Yeah.
but again, it was as soon as I did it, I
Yeah.
knew this was allowing me to connect and to share
Yeah.
and to be transparent and honest. And like the people who've done it, obviously we can laugh at it, but I would say things, and as they're coming out of my mouth, I'm looking at people's reaction, like their jaws are dropping. Like, why are you unloading this on me? I don't want to take this from you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but there was a sick sense of healing in that process for me.
It's such a paradox sometimes because it's
It
like the
really
drugs and
is.
alcohol bring relief from the pain.
Mm,
And in a way, it helps us survive those
mm,
really crazy times. But then that thing that saves you begins to kill you at some point.
mm,
Why don't you walk me through, maybe some of man, I was listening to that podcast and you had some
mm,
crazy stories. Can we talk a little bit about your experience of when you were in Turkey and
mm.
you went to
Yeah.
go get a package?
Yeah. Turkey was tough. It was, I had traveled to Italy the year before. I went through withdrawal in Italy. And
That was heroin withdrawal?
yeah, I was introduced to heroin in Italy. And I decided that I was going to play the following year in Turkey, right? And I grew up with Midnight Express and that whole
Right.
movie. And that's honestly my childhood and my teen years. That's what I thought Turkey was, Midnight Express.
Right.
And I got this beautiful job in this beautiful place in Istanbul. I went empty-handed because I was so afraid of Midnight Express. And
That's fair.
yeah, and I said to myself, you know what? Like I was able to hustle heroin on the streets of Italy. Like I'll find what I need in Turkey, but I didn't right away. Obviously in a panic, going through withdrawal, I made arrangements for a drug dealer to send me some OxyContin, and it's going to help me get through the first until I'm able to find what I need on the streets of Istanbul. And I was so looking forward to that day. I had been so sick for probably 3 weeks. My
Wow.
body was completely shut down. And I got a phone call. I got a phone call that I had a package. Right there, red flag. They're contacting me thinking, like, why are they just not delivering it to the address? So, right there was a red flag. And I had a decision. Do I go get the package that has probably $5,000 worth of oxys in it? Or do I just say I never expected a package and leave it? Everything was telling me, just let this one go. Take this loss, let them have it. You have children. I mean, like, what are we going to do here in Turkey when they find out you're smuggling in Oxycontin into their country? So
Oof.
I went down. I walked in. I went with a staff member from my professional basketball team. I stood at the counter and I'm standing at the counter and I said my name and I gave my passport and they went in the back and I saw this man come around the corner and he has my package and it's wrapped in tape. So right there, I'm saying I'm done.
Like it had already been open?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Oh,
definitely,
shit.
definitely open. It was one of those moments. I had a split second. Do I just say I'm out and I'm going to walk away, or do I receive it? And the power of addiction, right? I stood there with the hopes that they haven't found out, they haven't found it. He handed me the package and I signed for it and I got in the car. And when I opened it, someone in Boston went through it at the airport and they saw something in the package and they went through it. And there was a little note in there that whoever found it knew who I was and basically expressed to me that I need help and that if it wasn't for them taking the pills out of the package, I could be in prison. So it was just one of those moments of, the depths of addiction that we're willing to go and the chances we're willing to take. And on the edge, that was one of those moments for me.
That
Sad.
is so crazy. Yeah, it is
And
sad.
again, I tell this story, but as I tell it, there's two little children, two little babies at my house, crawling around on the floor and their daddy's jumping in a car to go get a package in Istanbul, Turkey, that possibly in his heart, he knows that I could be in handcuffs in 25 minutes. And yet, I said goodbye to my family. I jumped in the car and I went for it.
Just the powerlessness you must have felt
Oh,
over.
it's awful.
I mean, you had no choice. That's the pull of
Mm,
addiction, is that you lose
mm.
the ability to choose.
But again, it was that moment of receiving a phone call that told me run. When I saw tape wrapped around it, everything said run, and I didn't. I stayed in it. And with that little hope that I'm gonna open that package and it's gonna be there for me.
Yeah, just that's total insanity.
It is insanity.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have, listen, I know you have lots of stories
Mm,
along those lines, but I really feel like that one highlights like the
mm,
insanity of addiction. What was like the turning point for you? It sounded like there were time like it took a minute. It took a
yeah.
minute and many experiences to finally have that ability to stop forever.
Mm.
I would imagine there are multiple turning points, but what happened that you were able to be sober for 15 years now?
Yeah, I like to think that it was a beautiful collection of tough
Yeah.
moments that brought me
Yeah.
to this 15 years. But I was 32. I was, in the middle of a horrible, horrible heroin addiction. And now, I had transitioned in my 30s to vodka because I didn't have enough money for the hustle of heroin and cheap
Yeah.
vodka. Vodka shut my noise off and vodka helped me forget. At 32 years old, I was drinking vodka and mixing in heroin when I could, and I overdosed, and that was my fourth overdose. And I was walking out of a hospital and a nurse intervened in my life and she said, I want to help you. And she knew my mom and she watched me play high school basketball and she
Mm.
brought me back. And my mom had passed away years earlier. And she hugged me and she brought me in back into the hospital and advocated for me. I wish that was the time that I stayed sober from. It wasn't, but she put me on that path to one, go through withdrawal and detox, two, to transition to a treatment center. And being in that treatment center for like 35, 40 days and going home to witness my little boy Drew to be a sober father. And that was my first sober birth. And I
Oh,
was so
wow.
proud. I was so like, finally, I can tell people that I was really present, right? Like you hear people talk about these, when you hear people talk about it, for me personally, I didn't get it. I was so numb for the first two that I really didn't understand it. And that moment I did, and I was so proud of it. And, unfortunately, I started drinking that night and getting high that night. And fortunately, was able to go back to treatment. And when I walked into that treatment center, there was a counselor there who said to me, what do you think about playing dead for your family? Like, why don't we sit down with your wife and kind of construct this story that you died in a car accident and let your kids kind of let go of you. And when you finish at this treatment center, you jump in a car and you drive as far away from your children as possible. And thank God that stuck with me. I went to bed many nights and many painful nights on a pillow thinking, what am I doing here? Like I shouldn't be in this house. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be their dad. They deserve a better dad. So that was my internal voice always. But hearing him say that and making that suggestion to me, it it flipped me. It really did. It was a moment that I said to myself that night, you're either going to do the work or you're going to die. And you're going to have to fight through this process or you're just going to succumb to it. And, and I've been sober since. And that man, no therapeutic class would tell you to make that recommendation to a patient. But I'll say this, as painful as it was what I needed at that moment.
Yeah. That probably wouldn't pass the vibe check at
One,
the treatment
one,
center.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But man,
totally.
how powerful that is to give you that visualization. And that was like a real option at that point, you
Oh,
know?
it was a total option. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was so close to that option.
Yeah.
And I lived on that line for so long. And I had a coach who used to tell me, one day you're going to sleep with a soft pillow. And I never really connected the dots on that. And he said, Christopher, I hope when you get older, your pillow is soft. I finally figured out what a soft pillow feels like in recovery
Mm.
because every night I went to bed on a hard pillow.
Yeah.
And recovery has given me that cushion, that comfort to fall asleep to. For many years I went to bed on a hard pillow and I knew that I wasn't I wasn't the dad that they needed. I wasn't the
Yeah.
husband, the son. But thankfully, right, sobriety is a superpower
Yeah.
and I see it in my kids' eyes today. And
Yeah.
those children that I was ready to run away from, they sobriety is written all over their face. And I tell people all the time, you have something special when you see your sobriety in the people who loves you's eyes. And it's really cool. Smiling eyes.
So
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, that is the truth serum, right? Because kids will not BS you for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
We have a few minutes left, and I would really love to hear about the type of work that you're doing today. I know you
Mm.
speak to a lot of kids, and there's a lot of parents, I'm sure, that are listening to this. Tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. So, for like the last 12, 13 years, I've traveled the country, telling this story. And, ESPN kind of gave me a platform. And when I did the documentary Unguarded, it kind of launched me into this advocacy, prevention space, sharing my story. But it kind of evolved into primarily my audience is young adults and young children. And I think, for years I would just tell my story, and I would walk out of that school and I would get emails from kids saying like, what a beautiful story. But I would never get their story. And I
Mm,
think as a person with this opportunity, I wanted to bring out their story. And the way I thought of it was to talk about the first day, to talk about the emotion behind adolescence and early teen years and growing up in that self-esteem and self-worth and fitting in socially and all of that. And so I did a segment on the morning show with Gail King and Charlie Rose, and it's called Note to Self. And they told me I had 500 words and I had to write a note to my younger self. And I really never communicated with my younger self.
mm,
Um, I recognized them, but I never really communicated with them. And
yeah.
and when I wrote that note to myself, which was extremely painful and exhausting, at that moment I said to myself, I have to find a way to talk about my first day with children where they can identify. And I think as a parent of a 24 and 22 and a 15-year-old, I think it's important to understand their why. I think it's important to understand inside of them. When kids walk into the house and you feel or you suspect they're under the influence, 95% of the parents want to know where they got it, who gave it to them, who bought it, how much did you do, what did you do? And parents don't ask their children why. I get in front of kids today and I ask them why, and I ask them to ask themselves why. So what the work I've done, I do about 200 speaking events a year, and I've done it for over a decade. It's beautiful. I love it. It's kind of like where I want to be, where I belong. And then started a foundation that has helped a few thousand people get into treatment and supported them financially to get the gift that I was given. And Herren Project has given close to 10 million, $8 to $10 million in the last decade of people
Amazing.
who couldn't get into treatment and or didn't have the resources or ability to get in. And I sit here today and I'm 6 years into Herren Wellness, and I got a front row seat to a bunch of newcomers who are living at my center. And there's no greater gift, right? I mean, they're the
Yeah.
most important person in the room, and I get to be in the room with them every day when I'm home. And I'm really proud of this place. This place is something special, and I created something that I believe people deserve, and the care and the attention
Amen.
and the family and so at 15 years sober to be involved at this level and again have that front row seat is pretty awesome.
That's really special. You're doing amazing work. And I just really appreciate, man, I appreciate the hustle. 200 speaking engagements, dude, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
it is a lot.
That's a
And
lot.
we kind of dialed it back a little bit. It was actually more at one time at
Like
one
a
time.
like a typical alcoholic, all or
Yeah,
nothing.
totally. We're going.
Going hard.
More is
You put
better.
it more is better. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Listen, thank you so much for your
of
time
course.
today. You're doing amazing work. It's just so
Thank you.
inspiring, and keep up the good work, and God bless you for
God
those
bless you too. Thank you so
200.
much.
You have a great
I'll
day.
see you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Bye. One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.